Homesteading, page 114. Canning. Empty jars. Put them right side up on the rack in a boiling water canner. Fill the canner and jars with hot, not boiling water to 1 inch above the tops of the jars. Boil for 10 minutes. Remove and drain hot. Sterilized jars one at a time. Save the hot water for processing filled jars. Fill jars with food. Add lids and tighten screw bands. Empty jars used for vegetables, meats, and fruits to be processed in a pressure canner do not need not be sterilized beforehand. It is also necessary to sterilize jars for fruits, tomatoes, and pickled or fermented foods that will be processed 10 minutes or longer in a boiling water canner. Lid selection, preparation, and use. The common self-sealing lid consists of a flat metal lid held in place by a metal screw band during processing. The flat lid is crimped around its bottom edge to form a trowel, which is filled with a colored gasket material. When jars are processed, the lid gasket softens and flows slightly to cover the jar sealing surface, yet allows air to escape from the jar. The gasket then forms an airtight seal as the jar cools. Gaskets in unused lids work well for at least 5 years from date of manufacture. The gasket material in older unused lids may fail to seal on jars. It is best to buy only the quantity of lids you will use in 1 year. To ensure a good seal, carefully follow the manufacturer's directions in preparing lids for use. Examine all metal lids carefully. Do not use old, dented, or deformed lids or lids with gaps or other defects in the sealing gasket. After filling jars with food, release air bubbles by inserting a flat plastic, not metal, spatula between the food and the jar. Slowly turn the jar and move the spatula up and down to allow air bubbles to escape. Adjust the headspace and then clean the jar rim sealing surface with a dampened paper towel. Place the lid gasket down onto the cleaned jar sealing surface. Unclean jar sealing surfaces may cause seal failures. Then fit the metal screw band over the flat lid. Follow the manufacturer's guidelines enclosed with or on the box for tightening the jar lids properly. If screw bands are too tight, air cannot vent during processing, and food will discolor during storage. Over tightening also may cause lids to buckle and jars to break, especially with raw packed pressure processed food. If screw bands are too loose, liquid may escape from jars during processing. Seals may fail and the food will need to be reprocessed. Do not retighten lids after processing jars. As jars cool, the contents in the jar contract, pulling the self-sealing lid firmly against the jar to form a high vacuum. Screw bands are not needed on stored jars. They can be removed easily after jars are cooled. When removed, washed, dried, and stored in a dry area, screw bands may be used many times. If left on stored jars, they become difficult to remove, often rust, and may not work properly again. Selecting the correct processing time.
Charter schools are so important to the success of our students.
The option to have different.
All right, selecting the correct processing time. When food is canned in boiling water, more processing time is needed for most raw packed foods and for quart jars than is needed for hot packed foods and pint jars. To destroy microorganisms in acid foods processed in a boiling water canner, you must process jars for the correct number of minutes in boiling water. Cool the jars at room temperature. To destroy microorganisms in low acid foods processed with a pressure canner, you must process the jars for the correct number of minutes at 240 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 psig, or 250 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 psig. Allow canner to cool at room temperature until it is completely depressurized. The food may spoil if you fail to use the proper processing times. Fail to vent steam from canners properly. Process at lower pressure than specified. Process for fewer minutes than specified. Or cool the canner with water. Processing times for half pint and pint jars are the same, as are times for 1.5 pint and quart jars. For some products, you have a choice of processing at 5, 10, or 15 psig. In these cases, choose the canner pressure, psig, you wish to use and match it with your pack style, raw or hot, and jar size to find the correct processing time. Recommended canners. There are two main types of canners for heat processing home canned food: boiling water canners and pressure canners. Most are designed to hold 7, page 115, 1 quart jars or 8 to 9 1 pint jars. Small pressure canners hold 4 1 quart jars. Some large pressure canners hold 18 1 pint jars in 2 layers, but hold only 7 quart jars. Pressure saucepans with smaller volume capacities are not recommended for use in canning. Treat small pressure canners the same as standard larger canners. They should be vented using the typical venting procedures. Low acid foods must be processed in a pressure canner to be free of botulism risks. Although pressure canners also may be used for processing acid foods, boiling water canners are recommended because they are faster. A pressure canner would require from 55 to 100 minutes to can a load of jars. The total time for canning most acid foods in boiling water varies from 25 to 60 minutes. A boiling water canner loaded with filled jars requires about 20 to 30 minutes of heating before its water begins to boil. A loaded pressure canner requires about 12 to 15 minutes of heating before it begins to vent. Another 10 minutes to vent the canner. Another 5 minutes to pressurize the canner. Another 8 to 10 minutes to process the acid food. And finally, another 20 to 60 minutes to cool the canner before removing jars. Boiling water canners. These canners are made of aluminum or porcelain covered steel. They have removable perforated racks and fitted lids. The canner must be deep enough so that at least 1 inch of briskly boiling water will cover the tops of jars during processing. Some boiling water canners do not have flat bottoms. A flat bottom must be used on an electric range. Either a flat or ridged bottom can be used on a gas burner. To ensure uniform processing of all jars with an electric range, the canner should be no more than 4 inches wider in diameter than the element on which it is heated. Using a boiling water canner. Follow these steps for successful boiling water canning. Number 1, fill the canner halfway with water. Number 2, preheat water to 140 degrees Fahrenheit for raw packed foods and to 180 degrees Fahrenheit for hot packed foods. 3, load filled jars fitted with lids into the canner rack and use the handles to lower the rack into the water, or fill the canner 1 jar at a time with a jar lifter. Number 4, add more boiling water if needed, so the water level is at least 1 inch above jar tops. Number 5, turn heat to its highest position until water boils vigorously. Number 6, set a timer for the minutes required for processing the food. Number 7, cover with the canner lid and lower the heat setting to maintain a gentle boil throughout processing time. Number 8, add more boiling water if needed to keep water level above the jars. Number 9, when jars have been boiled for the recommended time, turn off the heat and remove the canner lid. Number 10, using a jar lifter, remove the jars and place them on a towel, leaving at least 1 inch of space between the jars during cooling. Pressure canners. Pressure canners for use in the home have been extensively redesigned in recent years. Models made before the 1970s were heavy walled kettles with clamp-on lids. They were fitted with a dial gauge, a vent port in the form of a petcock or counterweight, and a safety fuse. Modern pressure canners are lightweight, thin-walled kettles. Most have turn-on lids. They have a jar rack, gasket, dial, or weighted gauge at automatic vent or cover lock. A vent port, steam vent, that is closed with a counterweight or weighted gauge, and a safety fuse. Pressure does not destroy microorganisms, but high temperatures applied for a certain period of time do. The success of destroying all microorganisms capable of growing in canned food is based on the temperature obtained in pure steam, free of air, at sea level. At sea level, a canner operated at a gauge pressure of 10 pounds provides an internal temperature of 240 degrees Fahrenheit. Air trapped in a canner lowers the inside temperature and results in underprocessing. The highest volume of air trapped in a canner occurs in processing raw packed foods in dial gauge canners. These canners do not vent air during processing. To be safe, all types of pressure canners must be vented 10 minutes before they are pressurized.